Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Spectral Podcast conducted by the South Asia Monitor. Today, we are pleased to welcome Amit Dasgupta, a distinguished former member of the Indian Foreign Service, who served for over 3 decades in Indian diplomacy and retired as ambassador to the Philippines with concurrent authorization to the Federated States of Micronesia, Palau, and the Marshall Islands. Following his diplomatic career, he transitioned into the field of international education, working with the institutions such as the S.P. Jain School of Global Management and the University of New South Wales, where he served as the inaugural Indian country director and later as senior advisor for strategy. Published author and regular commentator on foreign policy, leadership, and international education. He was honored by the Australian government with an honorary membership of the Order of Australia for his contribution to strengthening India-Australia relations. Today, he joins us to discuss the topic from embassies to universities, the future of diplomacy and the global education. Now, the stage is all yours, sir.
Yeah, so very happy. How would you like me to begin? Do you have a question that you want to ask me? Otherwise, this is a very long topic. So ask me a question and then can take it from there.
Yes. So, sir, the first question is, having served in the Indian Foreign Service for decades, how do you think the role of diplomacy has evolved in the 21st century, especially with the rise of digital diplomacy and geopolitical competition?
Oh, that's a that's a complicated question. Um, I'd say that the 21st century, when you look at it, uh, one would have always said that the 20th century was a very turbulent century with two world wars, um, millions killed, um, the world divided into two global powers, the beginning of the Cold War, the divisiveness that took place, the end of the Cold War, but before that, the end of colonialism, countries becoming free and independent and looking at their own future, which they now had the ability to craft themselves. There were a lot of positives that took place, a lot of negatives that took place. And the 21st century, I think people thought would be a calmer year because the United Nations was there and it would control, if you like, and supervise human behavior and work towards peace and development and progress and a sense of global harmony. But none of that happened. So I think the 21st century has started off, we finished one quarter of that century, haven't we? We're in 2026. And there's been extraordinary global turbulence and divisiveness. You know, some of the things that stand out both in the 20th and the 21st century is the nuclearization of certain countries, which include also India, but it also includes Pakistan. There's a big question mark about North Korea. Countries that are extremely fragile, uh, very adversarial and combative, and doesn't really, countries like Pakistan and North Korea don't really lend themselves to a sense of global peace and harmony, do they? Uh, then there was 9/11. Then there was India's own 9/11, which was called 26/11. Terrorism grew and grew rapidly. um, and actually became like a way of life for certain countries, almost as if it was part of their governance system. And then of course, the pandemic caused its own havoc. And today we have um, increasing turbulence in both geopolitics and as a consequence in geoeconomics. I dare say this is a difficult period and a test of foreign policy and diplomacy of all countries. As regards the entry of the digital world, I mean, at the time when I joined the Foreign Service, we used to write letters to one another, and it would go by diplomatic bag, and then people would see it. Of course, there were faxes and stuff like that, but if you wanted to send a confidential report, you sent it by diplomatic bag, and it normally took a week or so before it reached Delhi. But today you see it all real time. When the aircrafts crashed into the Twin Towers, people saw it real time. When the 26/11 operations were going on, people saw it real time, you know, and that has transformed uh, the way diplomacy is conducted, the way reporting is conducted. But it has also lent itself to a new problem, the problem of fake news, the the problem of being able to actually transplant people in photographs and attribute comments that they never made. Um, this has created its own difficulties and problems. And I think, with every opportunity comes a challenge. I mean, AI and chat GPT and whatever it is, social media has its plus points, but it also has its negative points. I mean, they're not just apps. People refer to them as traps. And so I dare say that, uh, with the evolution of time, foreign policy has started having, and diplomacy has started having new challenges, while at the same time, of course, it has new opportunities. I don't know if this long-winded response um, uh, is able to uh, look at the different nuances of the question that you asked. If you want me to expand on anything, let me know.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. It was really insightful. The second question is, India's global position has been changing rapidly. In your view, what are the biggest opportunities and challenges for the Indian diplomacy today?
Global positions can never be static.
Yes,
There is no such thing as a static foreign policy. And global positions are also always in a constant state of evolution. And consequently, the way India was perceived in 1947 by the British, and who, as you know, were they stayed in India for 200 years without a visa. Now these British had a view of India, and at one level they called India the jewel in the crown, and at another level they spoke about heat and dust, about snake charmers and elephants, about people who were ignorant. They referred to Mahatma Gandhi as the naked fakir. And, I mean, we were an uneducated bunch of people struggling to survive after the crown was forced to leave. Now, that British influence did permeate to other English speaking Western Christian white populations. And And they also started to see India in an uncomfortable light, in a negative light. This got aggravated during the Cold War when Pandit Nehru decided, and I believe rightly so, that he and all his cabinet ministers and the people of India were trying to build a nation built in their own image and not in the British image or in the Western image. And so the introduction of an extraordinary term took place in the English language, which was non-alignment. And they refused to take sides in the Cold War. But they decided that whatever side they took would be determined entirely by their own national strategic interests. And so if it was in their interest to take the side of the Soviet Union, they would do so. Alternatively, if it was important for them to side with one of the Western powers like Canada or any other, the United States, they would do so. But it would be based on the merit and assessment of India's own national interests and not a blind alignment one way or the other. Now, these were all strategic shifts and part of the way India evolved over time. And there's a very powerful saying by Joan Robinson, which is that whatever you may say or think about India, the opposite is also true. I mean, today we can land on the moon, on the dark side of the moon, and be the first country to do so. And we are a poor and developing country. But at the same time, we're also a country which, apart from extraordinary science and research, has serious developmental challenges. There is some might call it a contradiction, but these two Indias live side by side. I mean, there are people who, you can go to an office with a fantastic lobby and a great ambiance, world-class facilities, and just outside you can see jhuggies and you can see a lack of development. You can have high-class, highways and absolutely horrible roads with potholes. The two do exist side by side. Now, this affects perception, and this affects the global positioning of India. And naturally, there are comparisons which are made. And the most complicated comparison is between India and China. And people say that, look at China, it's doing so fantastically well. Everything is exactly as you would like to be able to expect from it. In other words, predictability becomes an important element in any engagement. With India, it's not predictable. So the global position of India has shifted. At one level, it is very positive, and at another level, it is disappointing. And I think the true test of governance is to be able to remove this contradiction over time. There are difficulties. India is a democracy, and it's not likely to give up democracy in order to emulate China. But at the same time, you do require tough governance and tough laws and implementation of these laws in order to be able to reach the great heights that India aspires towards. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. So the next question is, during your diplomatic career, what was one experience or posting that significantly shaped your understanding of international relations?
Oh, that's a very difficult question because I think from every assignment um, that a diplomat goes through in different countries or at headquarters, um, there are so many takeaways, and each of these takeaways put together is how our understanding of international relations and the conduct of diplomacy is shaped. So I would find it very difficult. But now that you've asked me the question, one of the things that stand out for me uh, was during my posting in Berlin, in Germany. Uh, what struck me, and this is after the wall fell and the unification of Germany had begun, the process had begun. What struck me was that much of Europe, including Germany, had outsourced their thinking on India and Asia and the east of Asia to Washington. And this was a very peculiar uh, impression that I had because while European leaders would, in public, say how they wish to engage with India, they were actually waiting for Washington's observations, comments, and perspective to build their own perspective on India. And this outsourcing, as I call it, was for me a critical failure in Europe's foreign and security policy. And over time, uh, the Germans in particular started to recognize the importance of India, but not fully. And within Europe itself, there was a heated discussion and debate on what foreign and security policy would be, because a unified Europe, which is the European Union, didn't really have a foreign and security policy. Their security and defense policy was entirely handled by NATO. And NATO, as you know, is a transatlantic alliance which is heavily dependent on Washington. And today, what we do see, especially after Venezuela and the White House's statements on Greenland, is that Europeans have come to recognize that if they need to stand up for Europe's interests, they cannot be tied to Washington's perspective. And this is an evolution over time. But the first hint that I got of this outsourcing, this dependence on Washington, on how you should see the world, particularly how you should see Asia, India, China, East Asia, the ASEAN, um, this extraordinary lack of attention. Um, and mind you, many of the European countries were colonizers. They were brutal colonizers, whether it's the British or the French or the Portuguese or the Dutch. Uh, they were not benign colonizers. Yet, when they looked at the world, they looked at the world through the eyes of Washington. And I believe that this was a great lesson that I learned, and to a large extent, it helped forge my thinking. And I dare say incidents of this nature do help forge the thinking of diplomats, whether they're Indian diplomats or diplomats from Ghana or Nigeria or the United Arab Emirates. It's these experiences that help um, develop a foreign policy where bilateral relations become important, but they are important only when you're able to convince the other side that it's better to talk directly than through intermediaries. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, true. So, from your perspective, what reforms are necessary in India's higher education system? to make it more globally competitive?
Oh my goodness, that's a big one. I think the Indian education system has many gaps. Um, I don't think the Indian education system ever focused as strongly as it ought to have done in the early years on research. There is a strong absence um, in the research foundation of our education system starting from school, and which is why a country like Israel, for instance, has far more Nobel Prize winners than a country like India with a significantly higher population. We have more educational institutions in India than most countries in the world have, individually or collectively. And this is because of our population, the demand supply mismatch. But we don't have a good regulatory system because many of these educational institutions provide substandard education. You see, the philosophy towards education and pedagogy is, to my mind, um, strictly lacking. In India, we don't recognize the importance of the teacher and the faculty. You see, when someone says that they are a school teacher, we look down on them. We think, oh, the person couldn't find a job. When we think of someone who's a teacher in a university, he or she doesn't command the kind of respect that a person does if they say they're a systems analyst or working in, I don't know, in the corporate sector, a middle level job in HR or something like that. We look down on our teachers. When someone says he or she is a researcher, we tell ourselves, the person couldn't find a job, and therefore has decided to become a researcher. The respect is not there. And unless you have a top quality academic and a teaching faculty, you will turn out low grade students, because uh, the teacher is your foundation for academic education. The second thing is our teachers, whether they're in rural India, many of whom don't come to work, a large amount of red tape and corruption has got into the system. Mm, Today, a student in a school is very familiar with his or her mobile phone. They're technologically very adept. The teacher, on the other hand, is not. And because the teacher is not adept, the teacher cannot keep up. I mean, a mobile phone today has more information than all the teachers of the world put together. No teacher carries that kind of information. I mean, you want to know the distance between the Earth and the Moon, you can find out in a second. You want to multiply 1.5 million with 25,000 million, you can find out in half a second. The teacher would not be able to do that. Will have to sit down and use a calculator or mathematically. So the point I'm trying to make is that unless you focus on the training of teachers, things are not going to work. The second problem is that you have to have a strong regulatory mechanism in order to be able to review and monitor the quality of education that's being given. It's not just the right to education which is important. It's the right to quality education which is important. And the third thing is, we believe that curiosity killed the cat. What is important is to recognize that strong education actually nurtures curiosity because curiosity leads to creativity. And unless people are creative, they will never innovate. So all of these issues need to come together in order to build a education policy that delivers. I mean, think about it. We have the youngest population in the world. If this young population does not become the country's human resource, we actually have a disaster in our hand. Because, I mean, today, according to Standard and Poor, according to their report, on barely 5% of India's engineers are employable as engineers, which means that the quality of your education has serious flaws. Not everyone gets into the IITs, but you have hundreds of other engineering schools and colleges. What is the kind of quality of education there? And if the education is poor, it's because adequate faculty is not available. When you see the highest ranking Indian educational institution, according to the global ranking system, is 152nd. China has around 3 educational institutions in the top 20, 2 of which are in the top 10. Now, this should shake us up, and it should make us ask the core question: why are we failing to produce top quality students? The answer is very, very simple. And it's a problem that you can solve. So I think, Indian education system, notwithstanding the new education policy, requires a hard look and a hard think, because we could be facing a potential disaster rather than a dividend. Did that make sense?
So, truly. With the growing geopolitical tensions and conflicts worldwide, many critics say that the UN's ability to maintain global peace is weakening. How do you assess the effectiveness of the United Nations today?
Look, I mean, it's very easy to keep blaming the United Nations. After all, the United Nations did not grow on a tree and fall on our lap. It was created by the global community after the Second World War and the replacement of the League of Nations. And, it was built on a single premise: never again. Never again will there be another war. And it was a sworn uh, commitment of all governments that we will now work together for global peace and global harmony. Yet it is very interesting that even from that time onwards, changing the constitution of the United Nations is an extraordinary difficult task. If you go through the constitution, you will find that Japan and Germany and Italy are still referred to as enemy countries. Even today, in the 21st century, they are referred to as enemy countries. And it has not been possible for us to be able to get together to change that constitution. And even though they're considered enemy countries, while we are talking in terms of the expansion of the Security Council, in terms of permanent members, 2 of the countries that are lobbying to become permanent members are Germany and Japan, and yet they're referred to as enemy countries. The point I'm trying to make is that the United Nations has not evolved over time, whereas the world has shifted and changed. And if you have an institution which is meant to serve the global community, the institution has to evolve. The institution has to reflect the new realities. And that it can do only when the global community, which actually put it together, decides and agrees to change it. Now, when the UN was created, it was created by the victors of war, right? So it was created by countries from the West or the Soviet Union. These are the countries that got together. And of course, the new and emerging economies, which were formerly colonized, were all part of it. And so we had some kind of a brotherhood, if you like, of a global brotherhood. But things have changed. Many of the new and emerging economies, like India, are no longer what they were in 1947. Vietnam is not what it was during the time that the Americans bombarded it. It is quite different. Many parts of Africa are quite different. And I think it's important uh, to recognize this. But it's not the UN as an institution we can blame. I think it's important to recognize that the global order refuses to change. Western countries would like to continue to dominate the global order and build it as part of Western hegemony and in their image. And in their image, the UN should remain as it is. And they will resist all means of expanding the Security Council, bringing about changes that could threaten their hegemonic standing. We are, of course, at a critical stage in global history, thanks to developments emanating from Washington. Whether this will impact the UN, I don't know. Whether the UN will undergo changes, I don't know. But I dare say I would find it difficult to blame the UN as a system and an institution. Rather, my grievances would be entirely directed to the global community for not being able to appreciate the manner in which new realities need to be reflected in institutions that were created after the Second World War, whether they are the IMF or the World Bank, even, for example, the WTO, which came into existence after the Uruguay round. uh, the WTO today requires fundamental reforms in order to be able to reflect the changed circumstances and realities. So, I mean, that would be my take on it. I mean, people are saying that the board of peace that Mr. Trump would like to create, or rather has created, is going to emerge as a substitute for the UN. I don't think so. I think the UN will continue. It will limp along. It is very emasculated, but it's there. I don't think anyone has the courage to say dismantle the UN and shut it down. But at the same time, none of the superpowers, if you like, the great powers, are making any effort to reform the UN and give it the strength, give it the teeth that it requires in order to function efficiently and effectively.
Thank you so much, sir, for your time and invaluable insights. This has been highly enlightening for us. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.